Good afternoon. My name is Gillian Balaban and I'm Board Liaison Governance Relations at GRI. Welcome to this meeting of the Global Sustainability Standards Board, known by its acronym, the GSSB, held on 19 June 2025. This virtual meeting is being hosted from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Please note that all public GSSB meetings are being recorded, and you can find the audio recording on the GSSB meeting webpage, along with high-level summaries of previous GSSB meetings. Present from the GRI Secretariat today is Bastian Butt, Chief of Standards, Helke Boutrago, Director Sector Standards, Harold Powells, Director Standards, Mario Albello will join later, Natalia Ubine-Martinez, Manager Standards, and Peter Dawkins, Senior Manager Standards. We will now start the roll call. Anne Lindsay.
Present.
Charles Chew.
Present.
Shalandra De Silva.
Present.
Deborah Ing.
Present.
Felipe Martinez Rodriguez.
Present.
Ikazuma Okaroba, sorry.
Present.
Jeff Robertson.
Present.
Rebecca Coriat.
Present.
Tomu Machiba.
Present.
Yandong.
Present.
Thank you. And GSSB Chair Carol Adams.
Present.
GSB Chair Member. Sorry, I'm trying to do things at once. GSSB member Anna Nefedova sent her apologies, and GSSB members Galia Tisankova and Julia Genuadi will join shortly, and Susanna Muscat-Gorska. I'll now hand over to the chair.
Thank you very much, Gillian, and welcome everybody to this GSSB meeting. The first issue for us to consider is the approval of the summary of our meeting in May. Can I ask whether there are any issues with that summary? Thank you. Seeing no issues being raised, we'll take that summary as approved. I will get to the other items soon. In terms of the agenda, I want to note that we won't be discussing the work programme in this meeting. We are still waiting for input from the various boards of GRI, and we would like to have that to give time for those boards to consider that input fully. The final two items on the agenda, the project proposal on impacts, risks and opportunity, and the quarterly update, we will be swapping round if we get that far. Whilst we would like to get through the approvals for today, we do need to allow sufficient time for discussion, and so some of the items may be dropped off the agenda and carried forward to the next meeting. In terms of the action register, does any GSSB member have any comments on the action register? I did have a couple that I wanted to raise. The item at the bottom of page 2. I think that paper is being updated. Is that correct? We had it in May and that's being updated. Is that right, Bastian, Mario?
Yes, for the global systems paper. That is also in the project schedule update. So we have gotten the comments in May, and what we have agreed is that the paper comes back in final form after inclusion of the comments from the GSB, and we're working on that. That was scheduled for the July meeting to come back for final approval as a position paper of the GSB, and that's what's mentioned.
Okay, thank you. If we could have that updated, that would be great.
Yeah, so this is coming for the next meeting. We have that up for the next meeting.
Thank you. Just to keep the action register updated. On page 3, we discussed the interim sector resource, I think in March, in the form of a reduced sector standard. I think that one is fine. That's been updated. And the update on available resources for projects on a quarterly basis. I think that's linked with the item below that, isn't it?
Yeah. So when you look at the project schedule, how we've done it right now, we have flagged where the execution of products is still pending resource allocation, or where we could incur delay. There are 2 projects in particular. So we've brought that into the project schedule. For the rest, we're confirming that projects are on track. That means resources are available and there are no delays incurred because of changes in resource availability.
Excellent, thank you. Resource availability clearly been critical. Thank you. Excellent. So going back to the agenda. Apologies, I'm working on a very small screen today. So the next item is an update on policy submissions.
Yes, and I can do that quickly. If you can move to the, yes, thank you, Jill. So there is one policy submission that forms an input to the Californian consultation for developing the implementation guidance for the bills in relation to climate reporting, and we have made a submission there. This is publicly available also on our website. And we've also made a contribution to the consultation on the Chinese draft climate law. If members have an interest in reviewing those contents, they can request a copy with the Secretariat.
Okay, thank you. Any comments on that? No. Okay, so then we move on to the financial services sector discussion. I'll pass over to Helke for that.
Thank you, Carol. Yes, and the first, if we please go to the first, maybe we can go first, yeah, to the substitution of a member of the Banking Technical Committee. So the previous person resigned for lack of capacity to continue in the group, and then we have found a person that we feel is a good substitution, and we would like to hear from you if you approve this person to be in the Banking Technical Committee.
Thank you. Are there any comments on this substitution? Tomu?
No, just I want to clarify who was quitting, then how relationship with the new person.
So the previous person was a person from the business constituency, and this person resigned towards the end of the year from the Banking Technical Committee, and then we took the time to find a suitable candidate. And there's the person in the paper. You have a summary of the experience. Has extensive experience on financial services in banking, reporting, and also on the impacts that the sector has. Does this address the question?
Okay. I see no other questions or issues being raised. The profile looks good to me, so I'll take it that we can approve that substitution. Thank you, Helke, for bringing that to us.
Thank you. And so we wanted also to take this opportunity to give you a summary of the engagement and an overview of the submissions that we have had for the public comment period. The public comment period went from early March to the end of May. And here on this slide, you see a summary of the engagements that we had, either leading ourselves or with other partners. We had in total 25 sessions. We had great support and participation from the GSSB. For example, in the global webinars, we had Rebecca and Deborah. In the regional meetings, we had Ikazuma, and we had also Chulendra. In the country meetings, we had Tomu leading the engagement in Japan. We had also 5 sector-specific meetings that we organized with UNEP FI, PRB, PSI, and PRI. And then we had another series of meetings that enabled us to engage with other actors in the sector. And for example, Rebecca also participated in an engagement that we had with the G20 Sustainable Finance Group. So just to give you an update of this, we were able to reach more than 1,300 participants. And at the end of the period, if we go to the next slide, we see the submissions. So we received 94 submissions, 83 via the online survey that we prepared. And you see here the submissions per stakeholder constituency and per region. Per stakeholder constituency, you see that we have received input from all the different constituencies. However, when we dive into each of the sector standards, we wish we would have had more submissions from the business constituency and investors. Although, in particular for this sector, the investor category, the investment institution, it is like a business angle because this standard would apply to them as organizations. So we also understand that, for example, this a reduced number of business and investment institutions was also perhaps the reflection of the current developments in the reporting landscape. In particular, in Europe, you have a lot of focus on the changes on ESRD, and then you have ESRS, and then in USA. So that may have hindered the participation. We had a couple of submissions from these stakeholder groups, either business constituency or investment, that they responded in a personal capacity, not for the organization, and others who requested not to have their names in the public record. So all that then does that the per constituency, in particular business, is a bit thinner than what we would have wished. And then in terms of the region, we receive input from all the regions, in particular from Africa, a bit lower, but on the others, we had more than 10%, and we had also global. So that was also positive. And I'll stop there to see if there are any questions or comments on this topic. I'm sorry, and maybe Cal to mention that we are at this point addressing all the comments and analyzing. And if we see, for example, that we really would need to have more input from a particular constituency, then we see if there's a need for re-exposure at a later point. But at this point, it's a bit premature because we have not analyzed all the input that we have received.
Thank you for that explanation, Helga, and thank you very much for all the outreach work that you have done, and to the GSSB members, quite a number of GSSB members who have been involved in that outreach on the exposure draft. Thank you all. Anne.
Thank you very much, and it's helpful to see that breakdown. I just had a question, Gelka, about how this level of responses received compares to other GRI public consultation exercises, to be able to put it in context.
Yeah, and it's difficult to compare, for example, the topics with the sector. So, for example, for mining, I think we were around 100, if I'm not mistaken. So it was a similar level. But of course, here we have 3 standards. So we also need to consider that. Also, of course, some banking institutions also do investments, and there's quite cross-cutting. But yeah, but I think in general, the number of submissions is a good number.
Okay, any other comments on that? Okay, well, we'll Ikazuma.
Yes, thank you. I thank you for highlighting Helga, the response from the business enterprise constituency. When I saw it, that was my, the immediate concern that I had. But because you mentioned it, I'm thinking that you already have perhaps some actions that you think you might be taking to engage that constituency more, and also the investors, but I'm particularly interested in the business enterprise. Since you have highlighted, you probably have some proposals lined up on how we can improve this, because the financial services standards, I really didn't think that mediating institutions would send us the highest responses. So what actions do you think you might consider?
So I think what we are doing at the moment is really looking carefully at all the input we have received, and then also seeing the responses of the business institutions. We also got responses from trade associations that represent their interest. And if we see then gaps, then we will see what actions we need to take. So at the moment, so we are not considering that we needed to extend, for example, the public comment period, because as I mentioned, I don't think that it was a matter of not having sufficient time, but also other factors that may have hindered the participation. So I think that if at some point we see that some of the responses we really need to have more of that engagement, we will come back to you and inform you.
Thank you. Helco, was the submissions by region, was that consistent across all three of these subsectors?
Yes, because we gave the opportunity also for actors to actually provide input in the same survey to all the three sectors. So yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So if we keep a watch on this and see how it looks when you have analysed these submissions, and consider whether any further consideration is needed in terms of getting more input. Thank you. And so I think we then move on to the labour standards. Since we we've put these exposure drafts on an online platform, and more than half of the GSSB members have made comments on the content of these standards, which the standards division have responded to, and we'll get to that discussion in a moment. I'm not looking for a discussion on this now, but I did want to raise again, and I don't want this to hold up approval of individual exposure drafts, but I did want to raise again whether we might at some point have another look across these labour standards, having looked through them again this morning. This might be something we can come back to after the approvals, if there's any appetite to do so. But looking, for example, at the information on equality and diversity across the standards, we are asking for overall data on gender and age group in the employment standard, the gender pay gap and the percentage of men and women at or above the cost of living in the remuneration standard, and gender and age by governance body and employee category in the diversity standard. What we're not looking for is proportion of women at different levels of the hierarchy. We're not looking for information on, for example, ethnic minority employees and or disabled employees. And in some countries that is required, certainly for public sector organizations. There's a proposal for reporting on the ethnic minority pay gap in the UK at the moment. So I would like to know, but perhaps after we've looked at these approvals, what the technical committee has considered in relation to these other issues. And I know we raised some of them last time and were told, you know, that there were other standards where they might be covered. And whether we need to look at these, what we're asking for across all of these standards, perhaps even whether we've got them in the right place, and the tables that we're asking organisations to report in relation to this data. But I'll just park that for now. and it's maybe something we can think about as we go through the points raised on these individual exposure drafts that we're looking at now. So Harold and Natalie, if I could hand over to you.
Okay. Carol, and thanks for the point you just raised. Yes, this project is quite interesting and challenging because there are many cross topics really. Good morning, good afternoon to the GSSB members. Today, I want to say that thanks to the tremendous support from our expert from the technical committee and the advisory group, we bring today two new topics, as you saw, as we share, no discrimination and equal opportunity, and diversity and inclusion. We can move on to the next slide. Next, thank you very much for all your thoughtful comments and questions. We carefully provide all individual responses in 5 stages early this week. I think that we submit all responses. Maybe we just received 2 early this morning that we can address later after the meeting. Moving on to the next slide. We classify the comments in 3 groups. As you can see, we provide
Can you I've lost audio. Is anyone else?
comments that were suggested. And there are some points that we will bring today for further discussion. Next slide, please. I will start with no discrimination and equal opportunity. For this standard draft, we received 25 comments from 9 GSSB members. We categorize all as content-related comments. This includes suggestions to adjust the examples or clarifications in definitions such as indirect discrimination, reasonable accommodation, or the presentation of the information, for example, the tables to report discrimination incidents. Most of the comments will be implemented prior to the public consultation period, and the one that cannot, they will present it to the TC after the PCP along with the PCP feed. Next slide. Moving on with some of the first comments on discrimination and equal opportunity, we received 2 questions indicating that it was necessary to have a better definition and explanation of workers who are not employees with clear examples, and also the clarity and the difference between workers who are not employees and workers in business relationships. We want to address these 2 comments with the following explanation that may serve also for all the GSSB members. In the labor revision, in the labor project, we do have to stick and follow to the definition and approach of our universal standards. And the key piece in this definition of different groups of workers is the control of work, which is covered and explained under GRI 2 disclosure to A workers who are not employed. And in addition, based on the discussions we had with the TC 2 years ago, we draft further guidance to help reporters to understand the concept and to report in the right direction. For that reason, as part of the first set of the revised standards, a standard interpretation of GRI 2 General Disclosure to 2021 Control of Work was approved last year by the GSSB, and it was launched to PCP. So you can see here in this box a summary of the 3 groups of workers that are part of the labor standard, and it's also using other GRI standards. And I would like also to add that the last set of the review GRI labor standard will include GRI workers in business relationship topic standard. So this topic will add more details of the definition and examples, and we are working also with the editorial team to find the best approach also for being clear with this group of workers. So we hope that this clarify, as these are very essential concepts in all labor-related standards. Okay, I move on to the next slide. We received one.
Sorry, maybe if we just stop there, because a few
Sure.
people raised this. Are there any comments on this? Any further comments?
Yeah, I have a comment, Galia. Okay. So for me, the first bullet for the workers who are not employees and the first bullet in the workers of business relations is more or less the same. How to distinguish if you are a reporter. Example, if I'm a driver of the third party transportation company, I still perform work for the organization and I'm not employed. But from the other side, I'm working for the other organization. So where I am, in the second or in the third?
Yes, I can. Thank you for your question. The piece that clarify this is the control of work. So for employees, the organization control the work, that is the means and the methods that are used. And workers in business relationships are workers that the organization doesn't control their work. And that is the difference. But those workers still like work for or are linked for the organization, operation, and products or services. So that is the key piece, the control of work that makes the difference between employees and workers in business relations.
Okay. Galia, does that answer your question?
Yes, partly.
Thank you.
Still, we will
Thank
continue
you.
suffering with this. We are suffering for the last years with this distinct, and we always argue with auditors. So it seems there is no one solution for all because there are many variances between workers. So it's okay. It's okay.
Thank you. Let's take Tomu next.
Yeah, my question about more presentation. I think it's this third category. It's pretty important in terms of talking about supply chain due diligence. But it's I don't know whether this is the right place to introduce new category. And if we introduce new category, somehow we have to explain in a more higher level of the whole GRI standards.
Maybe I didn't get well your question. So I think that the standard interpretation like even goes further of this table, and I think it's helpful for the organization to understand, to find also examples between the different group of workers. But you can rephrase like your question will be like helpful for me to understand your point.
Okay, thank you. Anna.
Thank you very much, Natalia. And, I think as other GSSB members have mentioned, the complexity of today's supply chain relationships and the extensive use of outsourcing means that it is a complex area to define. I just wanted to check that I'd understood correctly. First, if I followed the presentation correctly, I understand that there'll be future work which will be more in depth on the workers of business relationships in terms of the ongoing planning for the labour standards review. And then secondly, just a practical point on the slide that we've got now. Am I right in then thinking that to meet that category, all of the bullets need to be covered? Or is it one of the bullets would be enough to kind of fall into that particular category? Do you see what I mean? So, for example, in the second block, would a worker have to meet all of those three criteria to meet the definition of a worker who are not employees and whose work is controlled by the organisation, if you see what I mean?
Yes. Thank you for your questions. The first, yes, exactly as you just say, the last set of standards that are part of the third group that are worker rights and protections is planned to have a standard. It's called workers. So far, it's workers in business relationships. So there we have like requirements related to the management and system to monitor workers in business relationships with the focus on labor rights and working conditions. and metrics related with that. And in that way, it's also expected that the organization report, the scope of the workers in business relations. And so it is a word that is coming and will be presented later to the GSSB members on this. On your second question, yes, is the point about controller work. So it could happen that for the second group workers who are not employees and who will control the organization, it could be that if the organization direct the work performed, or so it could be one of those, or both, or it has control over the means of metrics. So it could be one of those two conditions that are there.
Thank you. Yan Dong.
Yes, thank you. So my question is also regarding the last bullet points regarding the workers of business relationships. So I mean, I understand that we need to increase supply chain in the disclosure requirements, and I also put some other comments later as well regarding how many tiers of a supply chain we need to go in depth into. Because I remember there are some requirements are asking for female, for example, female employees percentage. It looks a little bit strange to go all the way down to the last tier of the supplier. So just wondering whether there are any limitations on what do you mean by supply chain workers? How many tiers of supply chain is needed? And then I also have a question regarding, I mean, we're talking about textile clothing. Does the clients, so the one who is buying the clothes, somehow consider as workers here of business relationships, or it's totally out of story?
Thank you.
I'm not sure I understood that last part, but
Yeah.
maybe Harold did. Harold, would you like to come in and just give an overview of your view on some of these questions and where we are?
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Well, I need to raise my hand just to explain where we come from. And so the basis is really the GRI Universal Standards, where we have a big parts describing also the employees, but also the scope of work, which spans to the business relationships. So to give the example of textile, about the number of tiers you have to go, it's about the impact on the workers, on the employees. So you have to define whether it's within the scope of your organization and your reporting scope. I think many of you will see. This is a gray area. This is difficult. So it could be 1 tier, it could be 5 tiers. But if there is a worker or business relationship which has an indirect impact on your, I would say, on your business, then probably yourself, you want to know it, and also other people who want to take decisions want to know it. So this is, in the GRI system, it's up to you to decide that and to discuss that with stakeholders, do your due diligence, and this is difficult. This is difficult, but GRI as a whole, yeah, we are looking at the entire value chain, you could say. In this case, we're not looking at the customers. That's another story. We have other standards for that. But so it's set up. There are no new definitions here, but we will work on more examples because we have these questions. So in the new workers and business relationship, I can imagine, Natalia, that we come up with some examples in between, that we also discuss this with the GSSB, just to test also with GSSB members whether these are the examples which will help reporters a little bit further. But I also, based on the further discussion, I would absolutely like to invite everybody to go through if you go through the labor standards, do this in context, in context together with GRI 2, because that's where the basis comes from. Also about on the control of work, where we have the extra interpretation documents created for. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say here. So we didn't invent basically new things here. Back to you, Carol.
Okay, thank you. I've had a couple of comments that Natalia's connection is not very clear. We might try again for a short while. And Harold, if there are still issues, if I get any more comments, would you be able to take over?
I'm standby.
Okay, thank you. Natalia, please continue.
Okay, I can try. Do you hear me well?
I can just now.
Okay, good. So I will try also maybe not to move if that is maybe an issue. So moving on to the next slide. We received one comment requesting to dedicate some time today to discuss the delineation between the topics of the exposure draft. So the team thought it's a great comment to explain the rationale of the TC and AG on these topics. I can start saying that our experts from the TC decided that the base approach was to keep similar terminologies as the ILO. So they decided to move equal opportunity that now it was in one of the standards of GRI, so to move equal opportunity to no discrimination standard, because equal opportunity and non-discrimination are closely related concepts and described together in the ILO Convention. And also no discrimination is a foundation of equal opportunity. So you cannot have true equal opportunity unless discrimination is actively prevented. Then they decide that these two are clustered together. So it's a small change if you see the current GRI standards. Now you saw that diversity now comes with inclusion. So the diversity and inclusion standard focuses on the benefits of diverse workers. So the two topics are now together because diversity was already covered by GRI 401. But the TC discussed the need to have inclusion as a new topic in combination with diversity. And the rationale, we can say that the organization, when reporting their impacts, for example, organizations that are intended to have diversity at the workplace must also strive to develop a sufficient inclusive culture so that all employees feel their voice will be heard. So that's why they put together these two topics and move equal opportunity to no discrimination.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I'd be interested to know if anybody has any comments on that. I do have one. I wonder why we don't just combine the topics in these two exposure drafts into one standard. And I'm looking at the number of disclosures. We've got 3 in one and 4 in the other. Whereas in GRI 101 to 103, we've got between 6 and 10 disclosures. Do we need to have 2 separate exposure drafts or standards? Let's leave the exposure drafts as they are. Do they need to be separated? I guess I haven't been convinced yet. I see a lot of the inclusion disclosures as being directly related to equal opportunities, for example.
Yeah, the TC raised that point as well. So I'm happy that you also bring into the meeting. It will be a standard like with multitude topics of discrimination, equal opportunity. So they thought that might be problematic to have all topics together, in particular because they decide that the no discrimination and equal opportunity are kind of the foundations of the topic, and diversity and inclusion are like good to have or additional like practice that the organization can take. So that's what the reasons that they decide was better to have 2 separate standards. And in addition, I can say that the GRI, as they discussed that the GRI global standards, so as reasons, no discrimination, equal opportunity as a convention. So it's a way that organizations report separately what are the practices regarding a fundamental right that is no discrimination, equal opportunity, and other impacts related to inclusion and diversity with a separate standard. But still, it was a point that was heavily discussed during the TC, and they agreed that the best approach was to split the standard.
Okay, I'm interested in other views on this, particularly when we look at the number of disclosures. This doesn't need to stop the exposure drafts being approved, you know, but does anybody else have any thoughts on this? I'm also looking on consistency across the standards and the sort of range of coverage that we have in individual standards like biodiversity and climate change, for example. Anne, please come in.
Thanks very much, Carol. And thanks, Natalia, also for sharing a bit of the insight, because I think these are good questions to be addressing. I suppose from my perspective, I think it does make sense to have this distinction in relation to the ILO convention as the basis. And as you mentioned, like in terms of fundamental rights. So at this stage, I think my perspective is that given the work that's been done, it would be helpful to put out both exposure drafts with 2 draft standards, but to look also about how, from a practical perspective, respondents to the public consultation would be approaching the idea of the 2 standards. So that would be kind of just my perspective, Carol. I hope that.
Yeah, I think that is helpful. And do you think then that we should include a question in the when we go out with the exposure drafts about whether they should be combined?
I think if we are actually quite interested in that, it probably would make sense to have a question on whether they see value in having separate standards or a common standard, maybe.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, particularly given when we look at this in comparison to other standards that we have. And given that the TC has deliberated over it, I think it might be useful to get some input on that. Charles?
Yeah, thank you. I also think that for now, it'd be good to leave them separate, because in some ways, I mean, they are related. Of course, I understand why the idea of combining them could be appealing, but if the standards sometimes become too long and it includes a lot of things, it sort of dilutes one or the other. And having 2 separate standards also maybe send maybe a stronger signal. But I do agree that it would be good to include a question to ask what's the view on that. But for me personally, I'm more leaning towards more keeping them separate.
Yeah, certainly for now, I think, for going out with exposure drafts. But does anybody have an objection to including a question on whether they should be separate or combined when we go out to consultation? Bastian.
Yeah, just to come in here on this point, I think the critical perspective that we need to look at is whether, when you look at a materiality assessment, these issues are treated separately. And I think whether they have standing in their own right and are considered in their own right from an impact perspective. We will continue to see very different ranges of number of disclosures in the different standards. That has partially to do with the history of certain issues and how much has happened in particular discussions. And partially they are very confined, but they have strong, in this case, legal international basis. So I think we need to look at this duality. But if we ask a question, we should frame it also from the perspective of are these issues treated separately when impacts are assessed?
Yes, indeed, and that, yeah, I mean that applies to everything that we look at, I guess. Indeed,
exactly,
and
exactly. But that explains oftentimes the separation between the standards, right?
Yeah. So I think this is a question to ask reporters. Yeah. and then we'll assess the responses we have got. Igazumi, you've put a note in the comments. Do you want to come in?
Yes, just a quick comment to say I'm not against having the question put out to the reporters, but I think, perhaps within the GSSB, do we have sufficient reason why they should be combined? I think if we sort of took a simple vote, we would know whether it's worth pushing this to the reporters.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily suggesting they should be, but Natalia indicated that the technical committee had some discussions about it. I do see a link between inclusion and equal opportunity. I don't know. Do we want to have a vote on whether we think they should be combined on the at the GSSB level? I don't have a firm view on this yet. I just would like to get some input from others.
My take is that they should not be combined. I think that it's easier to keep it simple and short, and where reporters are able to make that connection, they do. But to keep each standard simple and short increases the usability of the standard, as opposed to having, it very lengthy and then requiring reporters to look through all of it rather than just focus on one of the standards.
Okay, thank you. Jeff.
If we're planning to include a question on this topic in the PCP, then why don't we wait to vote until we have that information about how stakeholders feel about it?
Yes, I would say that, yeah, I would like to know how stakeholders feel about it. Rebecca.
Thank you. I wanted to say that whilst I personally think they should not be combined, I also think we should wait for stakeholders to see what they think before making a decision.
So I'm picking up a view that it would be interesting to ask stakeholders when we go out to consultation whether they think these two standards should be combined. Is that correct? Rebecca, yes, Toby?
Yes, I'm actually convinced with the Bastian's explanation about, when we are doing the materiality assessment and the two issues could be separate.
Yes.
And but also posing the question that we should properly explain and, why we pose this question. And
that's a good point. Yes.
Yeah, because just posing the question then doesn't make sense.
I agree. But so is everybody happy that we maybe put in a rationale for why they are separate when we go out to consultation, and then a reason why we might ask the question, and see what comes back, and then that will help solve a dilemma that the technical committee also appears to have had. And it also would clearly justify having two separate standards with a low amount of disclosures if that's what we end up with through the consultation. And helps us answer the question as why there are two. Okay, thank you. If we can move on then.
Okay, sure, absolutely. We will put in as an action point what was decided by the GSSB to include a question and the rationale. Thank you. Moving on to the next slide. And we received a strong request related to neurodiversity that should be mentioned in the guidance text of reasonable accommodation, because neurodiversity is seen as a difference rather than a disability of some workers who also require workplace accommodations. It is also important to note what has been discussed of that this theme what was discussed with the TC last year when discussing the current exposure draft, because it was already raised by one of the GSSB members. The TC discussed it, and the members acknowledged the relevance of neurodiversity, like many other possible differences which could arise from of people at workplace. So they also decide that the standard will not focus. Sorry, next slide. Yeah, will not focus, and I will come back later to the previous one, but it was important to stay with this. So they will focus on the terminology of differences between groups, but what is important for workers overall. So similar principle of acceptance, inclusion, appreciation, and so on. So listen, like all possible difference maybe could rise to exclusion. So responding to one of the GSSB members' requests, we suggest editing one of the paragraphs of the guidance text that describe reasonable accommodation and some group of workers that might need specific reasonable accommodations that you can see in the slide. So we hope that this responds to the request.
Thank you. Does anybody have any comments on those two slides?
And I will come back to the indirect discrimination in a moment.
Yeah. Okay, so we're coming back to indirect discrimination. Let's go on to that then.
Yeah, sorry. So talking about indirect discrimination, we got two comments on what we bring in for discussion today related to the definition of indirect discrimination. So the comment indicate that the definition is unclear, including the example presented, as you can see in the slide. We propose to address the comment with some adjustments in the text. Gil, could you go back to that this is not the right slide, sorry. One more. Yeah, that I want to see what I propose. So indirect discrimination. You see the text as is in the guidance right now. So we're proposing to add some clarifications in the gray color to the definition. Also, the proposal was to delete the example that is in the exposure that we present to the GSSB members and bring a new example taken from the ILO. So that we hope that this responds also to the comments that was raised about indirect discrimination.
Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so please continue.
Okay, so next, sorry, now, thank you. Wait, come back, that is not too fast, yeah. We can say that we received like a couple of comments about reasonable accommodation. One was about one of the examples, that is the tricky part of the examples. So the first example of the list, we have 4 examples of reasonable accommodations that the organization can make. The comment indicate, I can summarize that the example is unclear or need to be like more specific because that could lead that worker may ask accommodation that they may think appropriate, but actually are not reasonable. So the proposal from the team was to delete the example to avoid confusion, and still we have 3 examples that were like agreed by the GSSB. So do you have any comments?
Thank you. On revising job descriptions, I think one issue there is not including requirements that aren't really needed for the job. So, for example, does a cleaner need to have excellent communication skills, for example? So those are that's something that might be included in that bit about the job description.
Okay, you can revise and your comment and edit what you're saying, for example.
Yeah, we can do that. We can do that offline. It's about not including requirements for a job that are not really needed for the job.
Mm-hmm.
Tomu.
Sure.
Yeah, to me, this first example is very interesting and very different from the other examples. And if this sounds confusing and somehow, you better clarify and still keep this example somehow.
Sorry, you mean the second example or the three examples? Because we also try
No,
to.
the first, yeah,
The first.
I prefer keeping this first example.
Okay, so
That was deleted because of undue expense, was it?
yes, it's what deleted. I can like the suggestion from the GSSB member indicate that that example as it is might be like create like wrong interpretation as it is, because workers may ask accommodations, I don't know, the example say like a car or because they live very far or things like that. So they think are appropriate but are not really reasonable accommodations. Another suggestion could be like to edit, like add more precision to the example.
But
I think
I
it's
thought
maybe
some, yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's a case of qualifying the criteria around the comment that was made, the reasonable comment from at a reasonable cost to the employer.
Yeah, because this is not providing cars, because it's not alternative device or assistive technology, right? If you put in a company car and some assistive technology, then that's included, but it's just providing car itself. It shouldn't be included in this example.
Perhaps we can look at that small point offline and get that right before this goes out, and make sure we're addressing what the needs that people raised. Next slide, please.
So before I move on the GSSB feedback on diversity and inclusion, this is another piece about reasonable accommodation. The last comment was again related to this topic, specifically one of the paragraphs in the guidance text. The comments raised by the GSSB members indicate that the need that the business element is captured also in the guidance text, and not only considering the individual needs of the workers. The TC heavily discussed this section, especially the IOE, the employers' representatives, also brought this point during the development of the draft. The team, standard deviation team, had a paragraph that it was dropped out to make more concise the guidance text, but we propose to bring in it again. You can see in the slide to show that the reasonable accommodation should be balanced between necessary provisions to accommodate workers' characteristics, but also considering the organization. And as an additional note to this point is we will receive further feedback during the PCP, because one of the questions of the survey requests whether the guidance text of this topic about reasonable accommodation is clearly explained. So before I move on to the next slide, is there any question from the GSSB?
No, and Susanna has sent in some comments that are in the chat because she can't connect. Would you mind raising them at the appropriate time, please? Would that be something you could do for us? Thank you.
Can you hear me? She just mentioned I think that she was supportive of the neurodiversity point that we were discussing earlier. And then I think on this one, if I've understood correctly, it's the point that that there's additional resources that could be referenced in the bibliography, which the ILO UN Women Guide Empowering Women at Work. So that could be something that could be added to the
after the meeting. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. If you could just keep an eye on those, Anne, and bring them in at the right time, I'd appreciate it. Thanks. Not very good at multitasking. Okay, please continue.
So now, thank you very much again to all the GSSB members who comment on the diversity and inclusion. We received 13 comments from 6 GSSB members. So those comments were content related, specifically for the guidance text and the rationale of some of the disclosure. We provide written responses in 5 stages to each individual comment. Please, next slide. One of the comments was the requirement under the disclosure of the metrics to diversity at governance bodies and employees. The comment say that if the organization reports in general all numbers of employees or individuals as his count, why do the organization need to report the number and also the percentage? This is a good question. Thank you for it. Indeed, the presentation of the information was discussed by the TC and the AAG, and they agree that both informations are helpful if the organization needs to report the percentage. It is because it has the number of the employees and individuals, so they thought that is in a practical terms, the organization will have two information. And on the other side, those different level of information they consider are very valuable for the information users in making informed decision and informed assessments about the organization impacts in terms of diversity. Do you have
Natalie,
Yep.
Natalie, I raised this question.
Yep.
How, if you have the total number and after that you have percentages, it's very easy to understand. You multiply percentage by the total number. Why we need to repeat, to have two and the same figures? One represented as percentage, the other as head count. You have the head counts as total, so it's very clear. And after that, you start detailing the percentages. So why do we need both? It's a burden for organization and doesn't add any new information.
Perhaps Harold would like to come in here.
Yes,
I'm happy to, but yeah, so Natalia can also explain. So we have discussed this, and so it's a combination of both that gives the most clear view. So we're happy to go back again, but yeah, so it's I would say also then, yes, sorry.
Sorry, Harold. Another suggestion would be that we bring a question to the survey about this. Would be also an idea that we also hear feedback from other from the user of the standards. Could be.
Yeah, good point.
Mm-hmm.
Have we asked a question about this in the questionnaire? Is this covered by the questionnaire? Have we asked a question on this disclosure?
Yeah, the survey includes a question for each disclosure.
Okay.
But we can have a more detailed question, like a second question that is specifically target the point raised by the GSSB member.
We can do that, yes. Thank you. Rebecca.
Yes, from an investor use perspective of reporting, the most interesting number is the percentage, because via percentage, we can easily compare across companies where the total number doesn't bring up that potential impact.
Okay, thank you. To know the percentage, you have to know the number. But so yes, good. All right, thank you. Please continue.
Yes, and so the last comment that we bring for today, next, this is like yes, is a relevant point for other labor related standard and in regards to the rationale of the different age groups. This you see in the slide is the piece of the guidance text applicable to the disclosure of diversity and inclusion to A, B, and C. The explanation for this is the GRI technical team suggested change based on the feedback from applications of the current GRI disclosure 405.1 to clarify the groups 30-50 years old and over 50 years remain unchanged. The little change was to capture differences in the impact of younger workers, and we received this suggestion to split the groups and consider those under 20 years and 20-30 years old. So proposal came after revising different definitions from the UN and ILO. We present this proposal to ETC, they support and agree. And this guidance then was already used in the employment draft, which is part of the first set of the labor-related standard, which was also approved last year by the GSSB. So I hope this clarifies the reason of this group, or if you have any further questions, welcome to.
Thank you.
I have a quick question on this because I was, maybe it's just lucky that we were looking at the textile guidance as well, but the age groups for that one is slightly different. And just from a reporting standpoint, it seems kind of burdensome to report on different groups on different metrics, and just wondering why we can't align the age groups across all the different metrics. So I think on the non-discrimination, equal opportunity, and gender disclosures, it asks for breakdown under 18 years, 18 to 24, 25 to 30, and over 31 for women employees. So.
The exact same question, Carol, I had, because I think that alignment across the standards is important, because otherwise it's quite burdensome in terms of systems and trying to get the systems ready to have different varying age groups.
I think this is probably a question for Helke.
Yes, and I would like to give the floor to my colleague Peter, who we have discussed this question about. Peter.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, obviously coming up on the agenda is the textiles and apparel sector standard, which I'm the project lead for. But this specific point is the reason that we have different age groupings is it's reflective, and this is something we discussed with our working group as well. It's reflective of the demographics of the textiles and apparel sector, where the majority of the workforce are young women. So that's why we have those more granulated age groups for under 18, 18 to 24, 24 to 30 and above. But obviously this is something that we need to make sure that we align to make sure it's not burdensome with the labour team. And also this is something that we could seek further guidance back from during our PCPs as well. So that's the rationale as to why they're slightly different at the moment, but obviously we can make adjustments in the future if necessary.
Yep, I think I agree with colleagues that it does make sense to have the same ranges, same age ranges. So perhaps a question in the consultation questionnaire. Thank you. So moving on.
And moving on to the next slide. Thank you. Finally, thanks again for all your comments. I want to finalize that we share the PCP survey question. We will include the new question that were suggested during the meeting today. The survey, as it has open questions and to give the flexibility to the participant to provide their feedback. So if it's approved the standards today, we would like to put the PCP from the 1st of July to the 15th of September. And we have planned to also to have two global webinars, one with simultaneous interpretation in Spanish and Portuguese. So that is the end of the presentation.
Thank you. We have talked about making some amendments to the exposure drafts and the survey questionnaire. So just to check on whether you'll be able to get that done in time, should we approve these exposure drafts in a moment? And I assume that we have some GSSB members involved in those webinars also. So just a check there. Now, before we go to this approval, I just want to ask whether I'm the only person who has concerns about the omission of reference to ethnic minority employment and disabled employees, and the proportion of women at different levels of the hierarchy. I feel these are kind of best practice disclosures. They are mandated in certain areas. I'm curious as to why we are not asking for data on these matters. Harold, could you come in there, please? Harold?
Can jump in before. Carol.
Sorry, I lost
Harold
I lost my
Harold
button.
is here
Sorry.
now.
I lost my buttons here. No, maybe we can also, yeah, maybe it's important to understand also that it's about, again, if we look at the materiality, so the GRI 2 has a long the GRI 218 actually is talking about remuneration and also the policies, and is addressing many of the things you're mentioning, Carol. And actually, so the starting point of the entire revision of labor, we started with the human rights and universal standards revision, which went through quite some extensive updates on due diligence, on human rights, and on several of the concepts we have now also to be included in the labor standards. So this should be taken in context. We think and we believe together with the TC that it covers now all. Again, I can imagine if you go through all the hundreds of indicators that it can be that it can be more difficult to bring him in line. However, in a lot of GRI reports, we see that also happening. So about this remuneration, also about vulnerable groups. Vulnerable groups is minorities, low communities, everybody who is vulnerable. You have to take them into account. You have to talk to them. You have to identify them, address them, speak to them. But again, we're happy to see if we can come up with extra information. But the basis is the combination of the universal standards, and with the moment in GRI 3, if you address this as material. However, the aspects you were mentioning about these are basically always material, and all organizations are reporting them. I would say they are addressed, but happy to look into them again. Maybe we are a little bit biased as standardizers.
I suppose I do see these impacts as significant for the particular stakeholder groups that are not where we're not collecting data for. But it also, to my mind, has consequences for the organization, because if they're not monitoring their employment on ethnic minorities and disabled employees, for example, or the proportion of women at senior levels in the organization, then they're not necessarily hiring the best people to do these jobs, which is a business consequence, as well as having a significant impact on these particular groups and their including an economic impact. And is this something that you might have some thoughts on, given your daytime role?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my point, it would be useful to see how this fits together with the other labour standards in terms of, I mean, if I've understood correctly, how Harold has presented this, and maybe following up also with this. Surely this was a discussion that was had within the technical committee. So I think looking at how the different labour standards interlock seems important to me, Carol, on this point, where this would be captured, if not here.
I mean, I as I said, I don't want to derail the approval of these standards, and we'll come to a vote in a moment. But is it reasonable, and I'm looking to colleagues to comment on this, is it reasonable to suggest that we ask for information on how these other key issues, which organizations are required to report on through other means, how they're addressed through the GRI standards? Perhaps looking at the level of required disclosures in some different jurisdictions on these matters, race, disability, and proportion of women at senior levels, and maybe have that information brought together, perhaps first to the technical committee, so that we can take a view when we're looking at coming to the finalization of standards. I also think, given that comments that have been raised before on the various tables of data in the different standards, whether we might have a look at all of those together, all of the ones that have a breakdown by any of these different characteristics, have a look at those together at some point. Would anybody be in favour of doing that? Anne had indicated that she would be. Anybody else like to see that information brought together?
Carol, I think with the caveat that I do think it's important to approve the standards for public consultation.
Yes,
so
I have.
A barrier.
No, I'm not. Yes, thank you. I'm not looking at it being a barrier to that. But in approving these, but also to take a look across them around these key issues and the data that we're asking for.
Yes,
and
I
the
agree with,
format that we're asking it in.
Thanks, Carol.
Sorry,
I agree with you and Anne's comment about not preventing the publication for PCP.
Okay, indeed. Can we have as an action point for the standards division then to provide an overview of the tables on data related to any aspect of equal opportunities that we're asking for across these standards? Some rationale at the moment for the exclusion of requirements of data on race, disability, and women in senior positions. And perhaps on the PCP questionnaire, the questionnaire that goes out for consultation, we should explicitly ask whether we think there is any other data on aspects of equal opportunities which ought to be included. Is that reasonable? Tomu?
Yeah, it seems like, we shouldn't prevent going for the public comment period, but same time, we should continue this discussion among us, I think. And for the
Yes.
next time, maybe, like GSSB should take a little bit more time and to consider the draft and before going to PCP. And somehow, we wish to give more, technical input and we want to make sure, like exposure draft is robust enough.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's get to the approval stage. Does the GSSB approve these two exposure drafts for public consultation? Any concerns? First of all, the standard on diversity, inclusion, and the exposure draft. And well, let's take them both together. I don't think we're going to distinguish between them. Has anybody got any objections to approving these exposure drafts for approval? No, good. So we can take those as approved. Gillian, have we satisfied the correct process for approving these exposure drafts? Bastian?
Yes, we have the approval from the board as far as I can see. So, and there's
Yes.
a qualifying majority. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Harold, you have your hand up?
Yes, so thank you very much for the very good discussion. However, because it's such an essential aspect, the entire labor and even human rights, but especially also the labor standards, the full spectrum of it for the entire system of reporting of GRI, I think it could be helpful maybe to set up a session between the TC, especially because we have ILO, IOE, and the global unions, and have a discussion again to go more into depth, so that also, because also the GSB has to spread the word the entire world. So maybe it's good to have a discussion to go in more in depth in the also to discuss the worries there could be on because it's complex. 11 new standards, they're not new, they're revised, but
Yeah,
it's in combination, of course, with the universal. Maybe that could be a next step.
It is
still it's a very good discussion.
And I'm sure the technical committee have put in a lot of consideration on all of these issues already. Are you suggesting, Harold, that we have a joint meeting with them?
Well, I think it
Or
would be
did
more
I
like a
misunderstood
workshop, I
that?
would say, maybe, or yeah, meeting workshop a little bit more that day, that we can deal with several questions raised, but also that we go back to the concepts from ILO, also maybe some aspects from OECD, and discuss it with both IOE, so the employers and the employees, also the global unions, just to explain where we come from. So I would not say a formal meeting, but more an informal workshop kind of meeting between the GSSB and the TC, if you
Yes,
agree.
I'd be happy to attend that, and it would be useful also to have input in terms of what organisations are reporting on some of these issues as well. I don't know. Yeah.
No, we can put it on the action list. So we will take this action forward and discuss it with the DC to see. I assume they will also agree, but I will discuss it with them together with Natalia.
Thank you. And the next item then is the questionnaire. Is that right? If we could move the slide deck on.
Just for information. The next.
Okay, so that was just for information, but we have highlighted a couple of areas where additional questions might be asked. Okay, thank you. We are now very close to the end of the public session, and it looks like we'll be holding over the sector exposure draft approval until our next meeting. Because we have to finish on the hour here. I'm not seeing any big objections to that. Bastian, did you want to come in there?
No, of course, no objection. I mean, the discussion was required clearly. So it's just that when we look at the project schedules, and also importantly, the schedule for the next meeting, that then will push out other things at the next meeting. That's just how it goes. But we will update that and come back with the timelines. But today we clearly don't have. I don't think it makes sense to open up this discussion. It's a substantive one as well today.
Yeah, I thought so too, from the number of comments on the PCP, on the online platform. Thank you. So that brings us then to very close to the end, and we do have a very important matter to address, because we have one member of the Standards Division who is leaving us shortly, who's made a very big contribution to a number of the papers that we've requested, particularly around the global system and impacts, risks and opportunities. So I'm going to pass over to Bastian to say a few words about Mario.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. And I wanted to use today's meeting also in the public session to recognize Mario's contribution over the last year. His contract is ending, and in the year that he has spent with us, he has made a major contribution. First of all, he has allowed one of our colleagues to enjoy her maternity leave, knowing that her portfolio is very well covered with his background and his expertise. And I think I should mention that on the staff level, he has shown the ability to fit in from the beginning. He has picked up a lot of the work that was ongoing, and he has moved the team on a number of files. But in relation to the GSB and also ongoing discussions, we had the ability with Mario to move some of the key, I would say, strategic items in terms of positioning when it comes to the global system paper, but also the impact, risks and opportunity work, the proposal, which was also in front of you today for approval. These are key matters for the work program of the GSSB, and we've advanced those with the help of Mario over the last year. So at this stage, I also wanted to say that we wish Mario the best of luck for everything that's going to come with this combination of skill and experience. He will be no stranger to GRI, that's one, but also to the whole field, and he will continue to make key contributions here. So from staff side, thank you, Mario.
And thank you also on behalf of the GSSB, Mario. I've found it particularly helpful to have somebody on the team with a background working with accounting and accounting standard setters. It brings an additional skill to the team, and that has been very important at this particular time and with these particular projects. So thank you. Would you like to say anything?
I note you're running late in your agenda, so I won't say too much apart from my real gratitude to the GSSB members. I've got to know a number of you, and particularly both Carol and Bastian, in terms of you've both been great to work with over the last 12 months. And as Bastian said, hopefully I won't be a stranger to the GSSB. And I wish the board well in terms of this quite full agenda you have in terms of revising so many essential standards. So thank you very much, and thank you for the dedication that all the board members put in, because it's incredible, really, when you think about the quality of our standards and the effort we get from volunteer board members. So thank you.
Thank you, Mario. And that brings to the end our public session for the day. Thank you all very much. Can you tell us when we are offline, Gillian, please?
Yeah, it's just taking a little minute to end.
Mm.
YouTube isn't playing today. We just need one more second.
So this, we're still public, are we? Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think the colleagues are looking at, I'm not in the same location, but they're looking at closing the YouTube.
Mm.